I love your story, how you shared about how you manifested Grant. Let's just get into this. I mean, the list, like, tell us how it happened and what went down.
Okay, so first of all, yes, I did not grow up with money. We grew up very middle class. I never was poor. I didn't sleep on a dirt floor. But in our household, we were always struggling for money. It was literally paycheck to paycheck. And I just remember the constant strain and stress in our family over money. And so I had made a conclusion. My mom was the sole breadwinner of our family. My father, who was amazing, fought in World War II, but he could not ever come back and assimilate into civilian life, and he never held a job. He was, embarrassed by that. We tried to kind of cover it up and kind of lie that he had these jobs or whatever. And I hate to even say that now because he's passed away. I feel like he can't defend himself or anything. Not that there is anything to defend. It just is the way it was. It was an incredible father. But so my father, before he married my mother, was, and this is why I shoot guns, because he was an avid sporting clay shooter and won a world championship. And so I think he thought, marrying my mom and having kids, even though that was fulfilling, kind of ruined maybe his life, or that particular life of celebrity or whatever he could have maybe gone down. Now, my mother, so he was always like, told me never depend on a man, because I think that's why, because maybe it would lead to my dreams being crushed. And my mother was like, never depend on a man, because she couldn't really depend on him for any income. So I was reared to be the strong, independent, powerful woman, never depend on a man for anything. So now you're asking me about the list and how that manifested. Well, I was a self-proclaimed, I had moved to Los Angeles alone when I was 17 years old to pursue acting and modeling. And I didn't know anyone there. It was a bold move, but considering where I had come from New Orleans, and the lifestyle I had been leading since I was 14, you could see that was actually a safe move, and one that really I used to get me out of that environment that I was living from those teen years. So now I am a self-proclaimed, never depend on a man. I'm never getting married, and I don't want a family. And then Grant comes along. I'm in my late 20s at this time. I'm happy. I'm shooting guns. I'm ranked 10th in California. I work on hot rods. I've rebuilt cars. I hang out with the guys all the time. That was my life. Then Grant comes into my world, and I'll tell you why. Because one day, and I used to have a lot of guy friends. I don't know. I was always this tough chick. I never let anyone see me cry. I was always like, F you, I don't need guys. Like, I always had this really tough exterior, but I was like really fun. But one day, one of my friends, my girlfriend, right, she invites me to go hang out with a bunch of girls. And like, that is already like an eye-rolling experience, because I don't ever feel like I fit in. This was back then, not now. I'm very different now. Now I need women. I just want to be around women. I identify with women. I'm like, Jesus, get me some women in my life. But anyway, back then it was a different story. So I go to one of these like girl parties, and the girls are sitting around, we're drinking wine, and they're like, write a list and of the perfect man that you want. Again, this is just so cringy to me, but I want to participate and fit in. So I write this whole entire list, and then we have to roll it up and stick it in a necklace and wear it until the necklace falls off of our neck, and then the guy appears. And I wore the thing until that little copper cylinder thing turned my neck green, and the string or whatever wore off, and it broke off. But the irony of the story is I wrote over 100 items. I had never looked at it before, because I was like, why do I want a guy? But I looked at this thing and I wrote ethically ambitious. Like, I wrote just over 100 items that I wanted in the tiniest little ink, and rolled it up. But what occurred to me was this massive cognition that had never occurred before I had that moment, which was the girls were sitting around And they wrote their list, and I felt like it could have just been it might not have even been real, but my observation was that everyone felt entitled to this perfect guy because they're just women and they were just entitled to it. But I had a different realization. I looked at the list and I thought, wow, this is the perfect guy. Like this, if the cognition became, if this guy actually existed, then I could be with a guy like for the rest of my life, maybe, because that is the perfect guy. And then I was like, well, wow, because that wasn't even a concept before. And then I looked at, well, wait a minute, if I just created this perfect guy and he were to write the list of this perfect woman, what would she look like? So while they were off like doing whatever, drinking the wine and all this, I wrote another list from his point of view of what that woman would look like in his ideal world. And at the time it was like, well, she would be monogamous. She would want to be in a relationship. She would want to be married. She would want to have kids. She would work out. She'd take care of herself. You know, what would a guy want? You know, she would take, like from a guy's point of view. And I looked, and she doesn't drink alcohol and hang out in bars. All of this stuff is what I was doing in my late 20s. I realized that this perfect guy that I wrote down would never in a million years show up in my life, because I was not that girl that was going to be on his list. Like, we just would be crossing in the night because we weren't going to see each other. I wasn't going to be good enough, basically, to show up on his radar. And that was the first time I said, wait a minute, I want to create the best version of myself so that if I decide this guy actually exists, that we can find each other and actually make this thing work. Now, what's ironic is right after I finished that initial exercise, Grant came into my life, but I wasn't who I was supposed to be. And out of the over 100 items that I wrote on the list, the first two I wrote down were 6'2" and green eyes. The only two that Grant are not. On the entire list, he was everything else but not 6'2" and green eyes. So I never saw him, and nor could I see him because I still wasn't that girl, but he saw me. And then for the next 13 months after that, he was pursuing me, leaving messages on my answering machine with zero return phone call. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But finally, after I had done 13 months of work on myself, I cleaned myself up. I wasn't drinking alcohol, wasn't hanging out in bars anymore. I started to really do self-enhancement work on myself. And after the 13 months, after he kind of got into the circle through a friend and whatever, you know, he's quite tricky. But after we became friends, like real friends, not friends with benefits, like friends, that's when I realized, oh my God, like, this is the guy on my list. And he was like no other man I had ever been with. Like, that's another magical, amazing story. And now we've been together for over 20 years, but married almost 20 years. And, you know, in that time, there's ups and downs in a marriage, but the role that we're on right now has been re-energized, revitalized. I feel like I fell in love with them recently, like in the last year, all over again. I never thought that was possible, that you could get butterflies or feel that new in love feeling. I just thought, you know, those days were over. But I mean, Grant and I have this great thing, and we're, you know, I'm in love with him, and we've got this thing. Like, of course, like I'm not going to go like leave him for somebody else. But I just didn't have the reality for myself that I could actually recreate with him a whole in love thing again. And that's where we are now in our relationship.